Hello, Brian Miller here, and today we're going to take that tradition that every kid goes through of coloring in coloring books, coloring on paper, coloring pretty much anything that they can get their hands on. But I don't know about you, but for me, I was told time and time again to color within the lines, get it perfect, line it up. Today we're going to turn that upside down. We're going to start by just coloring with paint and with crayons right on the surface. Regardless of the line, we're just going to go ahead and paint the colors we like. Then we're going to put the lines on top of it. So this way we're coloring way outside the lines. So let's get started.
Okay, the first thing we're doing is starting with a 12 by 12 wood panel, and I'm going to prime it with some gesso. We want to completely cover the entire board with the white gesso and let that dry. Then I'm going to mix up some colors. I'm starting with a cool palette, primarily greens and lighter blues and a little bit of yellow. And I'm just laying the color down. Just building it up slowly. And I'm using really wet paint because I want it to drip. I want it to make some mistakes and some changes that I'm not planning. Then adding a little bit of darker just to balance it out. And I'm adding a lot of water because I really like the idea of the colors blending and interacting with each other. Now I'm going to add a little pop of color by using a contrasting red, a warm color, to just start giving it some life. I'm not really satisfied the way that's coming out, so I'm just going to set that panel aside and start over with a fresh panel. And I'm going to start with the warm colors. So I'm laying down some reds, I'm laying down some oranges, I'm going to lay down some yellows, and just let the colors mix and blend together. I like the idea of it being the warmer palette on this one. It's just a preference. It's an experiment of which way you're going. What do you like? What do you don't like? And for this painting, I like it to be these colors. Then what I'm going to do is go ahead and take some crayons and just start scribbling in on the panel, just laying down some lines and some mark making. And again, not really focusing on, what does this mean? I'm just trying to give it some layers and some interest, and just whatever I feel like, and what colors I'm reacting to, what looks good, using some shades of warm colors and just to give it some more life and excitement on the panel. Okay, for the lines, I went out to the internet and found a vintage coloring book page. So I took that and I enlarged that, and you can either enlarge it on a copier by making copies of copies of copies until it's large enough, or you can print it out larger using the computer. Then what you do is you cut it all apart and tape it together large enough to cover the entire panel that we're using. In this case, it's a 12 by 12 panel. And once we get it all taped together, lay the panel on top of it to figure out roughly where your lines are going to go, and then mark those edges, and then we're going to go ahead and trim those out down to the 12 by 12 size. Then we're going to take the sheet of the graphite transfer paper, lay it down on the panel, and then lay our line work, our enlargement, right over top of that. And then taking a pencil, we're going to just quickly trace over those lines that we want to keep. This is going to form a very, very faint line on the panel itself that we will use as a guide for doing our line work, painting our lines in. Now, for the paint that we're going to use, I'm using a black paint, and it's very fluid. So it's not watery, but it's fluid because you want it to flow really nice over top of it and draw crisp lines. And you can barely see the graphite lines that I'm using as a reference, but all of them will be covered over with my painting. Then once that's completely dry, I'm going to flip it over and take the stencil to color outside the lines. And I'm just going to use the black ink and a dry brush and just scrub the paint into the stencil. This is kind of like a little secret note to myself, just to remind myself of, where the idea came from.
If you're not comfortable taking some vintage coloring pages and blowing them up and using the computer or the copier to make a large image of it, transferring it, there's another way you can do it. You can take a stencil and use that as your starting point. So here, I'm going to show you how to do that.
So the panel that I started earlier in the demonstration that I didn't like, I reworked it a little bit, and we'll use that one to put the stencil over top of. And what I'm doing is putting the stencil down, and I'm taking a Stabilo pencil, which is nice and dark, and just tracing around the outside of each of these little leaves on this stencil. I then fill in some of the outside areas just so that it has a complete edge. And I'm going to use this as a place to start painting my lines in. Again, I'm using very fluid black paint, and I'm just painting in the lines, and I'll paint right over the edge of the Stabilo line as well. Now, one thing to keep in mind as I'm painting these lines, I'm using a very fine brush. This is a liner brush. It allows me to paint the line really thin, and it gives a little bit of variety between thick and thin lines as you draw it over the shapes that you're coloring in here.
I hope you enjoyed this demonstration, and I hope that this week you go out, get some crayons, get some paint, and do some coloring outside the lines.
I made one too.